This is a video about the Swedish Rune Poem, which is a quite obscure part of rune poetry, which is little known, but which has a relation to calendar, and which I find really interesting because it has an oracular aspect to it. And this is surprising because many are so interested in runes as divination and so on, but quite few seems to be aware that there's actually one of the traditional rune poems that has this explicitly oracular aspect. My name is Runeic Rasmussen. I'm a historian of religion. I work out of the University of Uppsala, finishing my PhD. I'm working mostly on Afro-Atlantic, but also on Nordic history religions. And so many seems to be interested in runes and particularly in divination. And I think that the way that most contemporaries base their idea of runic divination rests on the rune names of the elder Futhark as they were hypothesized by a German runologist named Wolfgang Krause or other historical linguists. And people often refer to the runic poems, of which there are allegedly three: the English, the Icelandic, and the Norwegian. And that's incorrect. There are more runic poems. There's also a strange little runic poem called Epicid Normaticum. And there's a whole genre, actually, of Icelandic rune kennings. And then there is this, probably the most obscure, but perhaps also one of the most interesting of the rune poems, and that's the Swedish Rune Poem. Now, the Swedish Rune Poem, that was recorded in the 17th century by a number of different scholars in a couple of different versions. And it's really weird and it's really difficult to read, and the versions diverge and the meanings are quite unclear. The poem is probably developed out of a form of the Norwegian Rune Poem, but it has really become its own work. And then there is this one particular aspect that's so amazing, and that is that these lines that express or reformulate the names of the runes, they are in one of the manuscripts by a scholar named George Stjernhjelm, followed by little prophecies. And these little prophecies, they are agrarian prophecies. They clearly come from a peasant society. They typically talk about the year and are sort of dealing with harvest or weather. It'll be fertile year. It's just one sentence. Bad winter, two words, something like that. North, cold weather, hard times, windy year, a golden year. And these little prophecies, talking about the year, are clearly an oracular aspect, and they were probably related to the runic calendar that I made another video about. Because in the runic calendar, each year is characterized by two runes. One that represents the solar year, the week, counting the weeks, and it defines the Sunday, and one that defines the new moon and represents the lunar year. And it's the last one that's important, because the rune that defined the new moon was that was the one that was given to hold this sort of a prophecy for that year. So the runes, they sort of express the cycle of the moon, and the different cycle of the moon in different years were given to hold an omen for, life during that year expressed in that rune. And what's interesting about that is that it basically shows us an entire little system of runic divination. The poem was collected from old Swedish peasants, and this is in the early modern era, so it probably comes from an other than modern context. It's probably not a modern cultural product. So it shows an example of an animist perception of the runes and how this is used to animate the turning of the year. You could say that the circulation of life through the years is the moon, the phases of the moon is expressed in the runes. So when the Nordic Animist Calendar comes for next year's, there will be in the introduction of there'll be a little shot at my feeble attempt at an edition of the Swedish Rune Poem, and I will put in these little prophecies that tell us something about a given year. So follow us here, and you can also find the project, and you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and one more aspect that I just want to mention is, why is this Swedish rune poem so incredibly unknown? And my suggestion is that the reason for that is Viking washing. The idea that the construction of nationhood in Northern Europe has focused on Vikings, and that this nationalist construction have rejected stuff that was not Viking. It might have been traditional, it might have been a form of traditional animism, but if it was not Viking, then it was rejected. And part of my motivation for starting to work with Nordic animism as sort of a lens on Nordic history religions is that then you can see a bit of a broader image. You can see how people animate their relation to the year, to nature, to life, basically, outside this narrow and basically nationalist conceptualization, which is the Vikings. So, cool, you can follow me on all these places that I just heard, and ciao, see you next time.